Hello, Virginia. First of all, I would like to say sorry that we could not have the real field day today, so I hope that you will get as much out of this next presentation, which will focus on the new crop hybrid rye and give you as much information as possible. Um, First of all, I want to share with you the current market we have for the rye in the US. It's mainly for milling and distilling, which means the food industry. But certainly it also have many other markets like we have around the world. So most of the rye around the world is used for feeding cattle and hogs. There's also quite a lot of rye in some regions going into the ethanol production or biogas production, means bioenergy. And of course, there is also a market for the really nice straw yield that the crop produces. First of all, why is hybrid rye such an interesting crop? First of all, it's because it delivers 35 to 50% more yield than the former old cereal rye or population rye, as we call them. And this is, of course, incredibly interesting because we, as you can see on the chart in the right-hand corner, you can see in your nearby state that we can get a really nice yield. Although I know that pure weather conditions and environment conditions is different than the one we have in Kentucky. So I believe that in your coastal climate, you will have a higher potential than what we see in the trials from Kentucky. Further on, I want to give you an idea about the economy in the crop. You can look at it more in details because this kind of Excel sheet calculations, it's different from state to state, so it might be different also in your region than what I have pointed out here. But it gives you some indications at different yield levels in comparison to corn and winter wheat. So have a look at it and adjust it as you think is fit to your region. The next slide is what makes the KWS hybrids very special. In all our hybrids, which are commercial on the American market, we have what we call pollen plus gene inside. It has nothing to do with the GMO at all. It's a natural gene that we have managed to isolate and really bring into all our hybrids. And what it does is that it makes the hybrids to produce much more pollen than what we have seen from the old population varieties. And you can see that in the picture on your right hand side, where we have backed ahead at flowering time, and there you can see the amount of pollen produced on your right hand with the pollen plus hybrids, and on your left hand with the normal old cereal rye. When this is said, it really reduces the risk for ergot in the crop, because the only guard against ergot development is pollen. So it means that if there's pollen enough to pollinate all the flowers in the rye, as you know, it's a cross-pollinating crop, so pollen has to be brought from one head to the other in order to create a kernel. So if there's pollen enough at flowering, they will always win over the sporers from an ergot. So if there is not pollen enough, the ergot sporers will be there at the same time, and they can take over and develop an ergot. What is important is to understand that the ergot can appear also in our pollen plus varieties, and especially if you drive in the crop for fertilization or for a late fungicide application or growth regulation. So therefore, we quite often recommend you to create trim lines in the field, so you always can drive there. It doesn't matter which time in the growing season. And this way do not destroy any plants, because these destroyed plants will flower later, and then you create a situation where there won't be the same amount of pollen available, and then the risk for ergot is much higher. The next point, which I would say, is that the benefit of the hybrid is the hybrid vigor. And the hybrid vigor brings a much deeper and wider root system, a much more vigorous root system, as well as the tillering capacity. And the best way of getting this is really to establish it as early as possible in the autumn. And in your region, I won't judge exactly when it's early and what is late, but our hybrids, if you follow our recommendation with no more than 800,000 plants per acre, then they will really just tiller if you plant it very early and not growing upwards. They will just continue to produce tillers in the autumn. And the more tillers, the more heads we have in spring, and it will really increase the yield potential. So get it in as early as you can, and then you really get this hybrid vigor. And the wide and deep root system, of course, brings this plant as the most drought-resistant cereal that is existing till today. So this is also very important, especially if there is a lot of sandy soils around. The next one I don't want to focus much on, but it is certainly an area where we in the future will have to be more focused, and that's the carbon footprint. Agriculture also have to deliver a plan to lower the carbon footprint or the carbon emission, and hybrid rye is certainly one of the crops which requires the lowest input in comparison to the other cereals, and especially also to corn and soybean. And low input and a really high yield potential, both now but also what we see for the future. It really brings the crop in a good position in order to deliver lower carbon emission for the future. The next slide is really just to say that what has been improved also by the hybrids is the agronomy. We know from the old cereal rye that the agronomy was not very good, both in terms of disease resistance, but also especially straw stiffness. And this is absolutely not a concern with our hybrids. Of course, when they get heavy in the top, they start to lean, but lodging is absolutely not a problem in our hybrids, and therefore they are always it's always possible to harvest them directly. Also because it's F1 hybrid, so all the plants have the same genes, and thereby they mature very, very evenly. So therefore direct harvest is certainly the way to handle it. And in terms of straw, it delivers a lot of straw, and this is a positive thing in many regions where you need the straw. It's about 1/3 more than a winter wheat, and in some other regions where the straw is not needed, then of course we can consider to apply a growth regulation to the crop. The next point where we also have a benefit as a cereal grain for feeding and also for the industry is really the fusarium is not such a big issue in our hybrids as it is from our winter wheat, as we know, and this is also good because there is no chemicals till today which has any effect in hybrid rye or in rye in general towards fusarium. And also fusarium, it's not possible to spray any kind of fungicides at flowering because as I said before, it's a cross-pollinating crop, so we should not stop the pollen in any way to move from one head to the other, and a sticky fungicide at flowering time will mean that the pollen has more difficulty to move from one head to the other. You can see on your right hand side in the bottom that we did a survey in US and Canada in 2017, and it really shows the difference between the wheat and the hybrid rye, that we are certainly much lower in risk of big infestation of fusarium. which is very important for the feeding industry. Next slide. In order to get a really good potential out of our hybrids, it's really important that you follow our recommendation throughout the season. And to my opinion, establishment is the most important. If you get a good establishment, you will get a good crop throughout the season. There is no doubt. We sell the seeds in units, and 1 unit is 1 million viable seeds. So it's very important that you look on the totes or on the bag, whatever you buy, how much or how many pounds is 1 unit. Because when you have to set your seed, you need to know that. And our recommendation is to seed 0.8 unit to the acre. Of course, then if 1 unit has a weight of 75 pounds, then you time that times 0.8, and then you get the amount of pound that you have to set your seeder for per acre. And this is very important that you really test this out and not seeding more than what we recommend. It's also very, very important that you really get it established correctly, so all the seeds can really germinate in the field, and you get it well distributed. So this is very important, and it's up to you to say what is optimal. Maybe my line for the different month here has to be moved a little bit. So for you, it's maybe optimal to seed by the end of September or mid-October. It's your adjustment, and for me, it's really just important to say as early as possible for your winter crop. The next slide is about fertilization. The hybrid rye would like to have some nitrogen in the autumn, and this is just to make sure that you get a good start. And you might think some will be leads during the winter, but the rye really take it up and keep it, and so for my point, 30 to 40 pounds of nitrogen in the autumn will be fine. And if you can manage to get all the P and K out in the autumn, it will also be good, because hybrid rye takes up nutrients very, very early in the growth period. And the amount of nitrogen, we normally say the expected bushels you want to harvest per acre times 1.2 minus what is available in the soil. So it means that if you want to, or you expect to harvest 100 bushels to the acre, then you have to make sure there's 120 pounds of nitrogen available per acre. On top of that, we need about 20 pounds of phosphorus and about 50 pounds of potassium. And I think it's also very important to mention that in spring we would like to apply about 25 pound of sulfur per acre, and this goes really well together with the rest of the nitrogen in the early spring. And if you look on the graph on your right hand side in the bottom, you will see that the biggest part of nitrogen is taken up before the first elongation of the plant. So our recommendation is always to finalize your fertilization before the first elongation of the crop. So please do so, because that's really where you get your potential. In terms of pre-crop, hybrid rye is a really good pre-crop for all other crops, but it's also doing well if you plan a good pre-crop for your hybrid rye. And I would say the only two cases where which I would point out not to be a good pre-crop, that's hybrid rye. So hybrid rye after hybrid rye, it's not a good idea. And this is because if there is some volunteers, they segregate enormously because it's a F1 hybrid. So you should try to prevent that. Also grain corn, and especially if it's under no tillage, it's absolutely not a good pre-crop for you hybrid rye. And this is simply because of the big pressure of fusarium through the whole season. Otherwise, all the other mentioned crop here, it's fully okay as a pre-crop. What is important to point out is that your seeding depth should not be more than 0.8 inch deep, but make sure that your seed is covered with soil. And which kind of technology you use, direct drilling or tillage, that's fine. There is no negative to point out, as long as you have a nice loose soil downwards, so the roots can really be free to develop in the soil. I think that's very important. And also I have to point out, if it's waterlogged soil or areas where water normally stays for longer time during the winter or early spring or even autumn, this is certainly not the place where you should plan to seed the hybrid rye. What I have to point out is uses of herbicides for the weed control. Quite often we say that hybrid rye has a fantastic competition against weed, and quite often we do not have to spray due to two things. One thing is that it produces some exudate in the roots, which actually delay or stop the weed seeds to germinate and develop, which you can see on the pictures in the bottom here. On the left hand side you have hybrid rye, and on the right hand side you have some winter wheat seeded in the same field, and there you'll see the effect of the hybrid rye. But there is also some wheat which grows really well together with hybrid rye, so therefore sometimes you need to use a weed control. And I just want to point out that MCPA 2,4-D or dicamba is not product that we recommend. These are hormone products, and when you use them, it's when you get high temperatures and already there the hybrid rye is developed so much that the head is sitting in the stem, and when you use such a hormone product, you can really destroy the head. As you can see on the picture here, it's a typical head after 2,4-D or MCPA has been used too late in the season, and this creates a lot of problems with ergot development. So use one of the four which has been registered for rye, and do not have this effect on the head damage. You see pronated, it do include a little bit of MCPA, but it's on ester form, so it's not so bad, and it do not have the same negative effect as the normal MCPA. The next one is fungicide use. Fungicide use is quite often not recommended, but sometimes we do have problems with leaf rust. So and why do we not recommend fungicide in hybrid rye? If you look at the upper left chart, it shows winter wheat and hybrid rye. If we look at the grain filling from winter wheat, about 60% is coming from the photosynthesis on the leaves, 30% from the stem, and 12% from the head. Whereas a hybrid rye is totally different. It's 60% from the stem, only 20% from the leaves, and 23% from the head. So where we do all we can in winter wheat to protect the leaves, to have a good photosynthesis for grain filling, we are not so much concerned about the leaves for hybrid rye. So therefore, it's really only if there is something attacking on the upper leaves in the end of the season that we would like to apply fungicide, and this is mainly leaf rust. So leaf rust, it has to be evaluated just before heading, because at heading and at flowering, that's where the plant is mostly stressed, and if we at the same time have very warm conditions, then leaf rust has a a chance to attack the plant, also because it's stressed during this flowering time. And therefore we recommend you to look at the weather forecast at just before heading, and if it's a really warm period, and at the same time if the plant seems to be stressed because of lack of water and so on, we will recommend you to apply a fungicide which has a long time effect, which means about 3 weeks, and to go through the flowering time, because spraying at flowering is a no-go, as I said before. So you can also wait till just after flowering to see if there is any attack of leaf rust, and if there is, then you have to apply a product which has a more knockdown effect, quick knockdown effect, just after flowering. Here on the last slide, I have just gathered some of the agronomy benefits from the hybrid rye, and also some of the quality benefits from the hybrid rye. And there I also include a little bit about hybrid rye for forage. We don't know much about our forage yield in your region from our winter types because it's so far south in the US, but we are working on it and trying to see where we can fit into your system. I believe that on the early cut you might have some very early types of triticale or rye which might be a little bit higher yielding, but if we go to the milky stage, I think our hybrids will deliver a very, very high yield with a high quality at the same time. And also I believe that if you get established the hybrid rye very early in the autumn, or even also graze it in the autumn, I think you get a much better yield out of the hybrids than you do of the old types pollination or open pollinated rye. And I do think that because when you graze it, it's important that the plant has an ability to continue to produce tillers, because that's where you have the high value, and this is what the hybrid can, and then even survive the winter, and you can use it for forage in the spring. But in terms of that, you can go to our webpage and get much more information, or you can always come back, contact us and ask for more update here. Thank you for your attention, and you're welcome for any kind of questions. Thank you.